All right, we begin our coverage this evening with what's been happening in KwaZulu-Natal, the passing of the traditional Prime Minister of AmaZulu, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Details being confirmed, Kathy, a short time ago that he will be laid to rest on Friday.
Absolutely, Tembekile. In fact, it's the story that will kick off this hour with the Inkatha Freedom Party founder passing away yesterday at his KwaZulu-Natal home at the age of 95. Newzroom Afrika's Ziyanda Ngcoboand is live for us at his home state. Also part of the conversation is brand expert Tshepo, who is going to be weighing in really on where to from here on, particularly when it comes to the legacy of Buthelezi within the IFP. Ziyanda, let's kick it off with you and talk about the day that has been, especially given the fact that we now are 48 hours after the passing of Prince Buthelezi.
Certainly, we have more detail in terms of when he's going to be laid to rest. The funeral taking place on Friday, as announced by the KZN provincial government. A memorial service set to take place at the Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi Stadium, which is not far from where we are. They'll set up a dome of which has a capacity of around 10,000 people. Insofar as what happened here today, Kathy, we saw scores of leaders from various political formations making their way here to Ngcoboand to pay tribute to the life and times of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, ranging from Action SA's leader Zwakele Mngwango and the KZN ANC as well, coming here led by Siboniso Duma. Interesting to also note that Dr. Zweli Mkhize was the most senior leader here today, remarking on the relationship between himself and Buthelezi during those tumultuous years of the late 80s and the 90s, when they had to bring about stability in the province of KwaZulu-Natal.
It's a very sad moment, and I think first we start by conveying condolences to the Buthelezi family, the entire Ngcoboand household, as well as the people of the Buthelezi clan, of whom he was the head. We also have to convey our condolences to His Majesty Isilo Ndulamiti for losing one of the pillars of the traditional Prime Minister and the pillar of the Zulu monarchy. And we believe that his departure is actually, taking away a lot of, knowledge, a lot of history, a lot of institutional memory, which would have helped to guide the young monarch as he steps into the new position on the throne. Now, beyond that, we also convey condolences to the Inkatha Freedom Party. It must be very difficult to have the leader, the founder, the one who's been their guide and their role model and their inspiration, having to depart at this point. Of course, we all know that the difficult part for all parties is the change of leadership. And in this case, they've only got one person that they've looked up to, and today he's no more, and therefore it's got a huge challenge and an end of an era within the IFP as a party. But we want to say to them that they have learned a lot. They have learned a lot from Umntwana, and so they need to continue from that point of view.
And in fact, we'll stay with the theme of the IFP, where to from now, bringing Tshepo Matseba, who is the MD of Reputation First. So, Mr. Matseba, Prince Buthelezi was at the helm of the IFP for 44 years. It's a long time to entrench one's own identity and culture upon an organization. So when we talk about what the IFP looks like going forward, what do you see the impact of that being?
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. I think for the IFP, in recent time at least, they've had an opportunity to bid farewell to him from a leadership point of view when he handed over the leadership to the current leader of the IFP and the new younger generation of the organization. But what it says from a legacy point of view is whether the IFP as an organization that wants to be seen to be active in South Africa's democracy into the future, whether they would be willing to hand over leadership to the younger generation so as to avoid this 44 years worth of governance, 44 years worth of leadership in different eras of South Africa's history. To minimize that, if you are going to make a shift, then perhaps this may be a watershed moment for them to begin to see an opportunity to bring in young leaders. But from a wisdom and insight point of view, I mean, they've lost a leader who had multiple brands, multiple personalities, one may argue, and perhaps even a personal brand of many contradictions. Some may say, as we hear, that condolences will continue to pour, positive messages will continue to pour, that he was a great statesman, but there are others who, in areas such as Gauteng, in Wipatong and other areas, who may say, but he led, he actually was at the forefront of a leadership that helped the apartheid regime to kill many innocent people, many innocent women and children, and that should not necessarily be written off history, because that would be a great lesson for future leaders not to repeat.
And Tshepo, we'll get into that shortly. Ziyanda, let's talk about this transition that Tshepo was speaking about, that the party has had an opportunity to sort of step beyond Prince Buthelezi. But has it really? So if we look at the role that he still played in the organization, the branding of the organization still very much carrying his face, this undoubtedly, of course, means that there is a vacuum, there is a gap that has been created. And it also seems to be something that the party is also actively thinking about now.
In fact, they've been thinking about it since he stepped down from the party as president in 2019, but then he was shortly thereafter named President Emeritus, which speaks to exactly what you're asking about, the fact that they could not separate the individual, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, from the organization IFP. He almost personified the IFP, and this is why then his passing away has left a huge vacuum. I spoke to Naren Singh, who is a senior member of the IFP, about what this means for the party, especially since in recent times we've seen that there have been ructions, especially waged against the current president of the IFP, Velenkosini Tlhabisa, where there were some who have been contesting him, saying that he shouldn't be the president of the party. You'll remember as well that Tlhabisa was almost the one that was anointed by Buthelezi to take over the helm from him, but there are some within the party who feel aggrieved by this imposition, as some would have dubbed it at the time, of Tlhabisa on the party. In fact, as we go to the 2024 elections, there's talk about a fight between Tamintuli, who's the current IFP KZN chairperson, and Tlhabisa over who, if the IFP were to win in KwaZulu-Natal, who would become premier. And so Naren Singh reflected on that quite sharply earlier on today.
His passing on should act as a catalyst for us, particularly in the IFP, to come together and ensure we do what he would have liked us to do. And we're very fortunate that in the last few years, when he was not president, he played the role of galvanizing the party. Obviously, in any political party, in any family, in any organization, once the head goes, you do start getting rumblings. But it's our maturity that must ensure that we deal with that in a way that will preserve his legacy and will also take the nation forward and take our country forward.
Of course, part of what this moment has also brought about is reflections, really. Some of them may be deemed as harsh reflections about the legacy of Prince Buthelezi. In fact, many people have had quite a lot to say, particularly in terms of the impact that he had on South Africa, going back to the pre-democratic moment. Tshepo, we're nearly 30 years after that moment, which means that there's been 30 years of opportunity of reckoning with some of the decisions that Prince Buthelezi had made. But it's been interesting sort of over the last 24 hours to see some of the reflections and the questions, particularly around whether or not he was fully held accountable. I want to bring in here the voice of Advocate Dumiza Nzebeza. You'd remember he was critical to the TRC Commission, a commission that also found, that a lot of the violence and killings that took place between 1976 and 1996 in this country were actually associated with the IFP.
in our report, there is an appendix where we, without commentary, we put about those 5 or 6 or 7 pages in which they were setting out the refutation, of everything that we had found, which was negative against them. And the court case never came, and I don't think, it was in the interest of reconciliation. And remember that, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was also about not only telling the truth, but about reconciliation. I don't think it served the interest of reconciliation for no apology having been given by a person of his stature. But I suppose it was because he found that he and his party were not accountable for some of the things that we in the TRC had found on evidence him and his party to have been responsible for.
And Tshepo, in many ways, in as much as Prince Buthelezi may have wanted to sort of argue for a better past, which we know is impossible, it seems now him being late has also resulted in the skeletons that have been left lurking, and those very much still marring his legacy.
Yes, I mean, we can't fault him for the failures of the South African justice system in seeing to it that post the TRC, that him and his leadership team are held accountable for what they may have done wrong. So that cannot be the man's or the prince's legacy on his own. But what you are finding in this, that's really, really concerning, is that there was no, despite his legacy and experience in politics in 3 different or 4 different decades, probably 2 different significant eras in South Africa's history, did he come out and say, well, this is actually the reality, these are the facts. Some people say that there are instances where he made some speeches that were sort of purporting to be an acknowledgement of faults of sorts. But when you reflect deeply, the expectation on this level where so many lives were lost, some estimate that the IFP at the time may have contributed to the loss of more than 20,000 lives. Now we can debate that and we can debate the number, but the principle is, even if we were talking about 5,000 lives, that would have been one too many, and you would have expected a leader of his caliber who served with the likes of Nelson Mandela, former President Nelson Mandela, who served in those levels, that they would have come out at least to make an acknowledgement and contribute towards healing. One of the most difficult developments around his style of leadership, his staying power, is that he stays until almost the end, and one wonders whether there was sincerity in him moving from the IFP as a leader and still leaving some type of strength and legacy. The positive, I would say, at his later age in life, as his contribution, in fact, towards the explanation of how the Zulu nation and the culture and tradition and customs operate, and really standing by the king and working towards creating a more sustainable future, perhaps some may say, of the Zulu kingdom. But he does come across like somebody who wants to stay, or who wanted to stay in power until the last second of his life. And one may say so respectfully, knowing that there are many, many people who admire his leadership. But indeed, it is saddening to see that, the legacy that he leaves behind is one that may actually lead the organizations and the nation that he led in towards more hegemony that he actually pursued throughout the history of his political career.
Ziyanda, in memorializing him, you also note just the great deal of effort that he personally took on, in the last couple of years of his life, particularly in saying he's putting his side of the story out there. He wants to deal with the myths, he wants to deal with the bad publicity that has been sponsored by some in our society against him. it doesn't look like he was very successful in doing that, but it seemingly was something that pained him deeply.
It did pain him deeply, and it's something that's been reflected by all of those who came here across the board, that they knew that this was a topic that pained him deeply. I mean, if you speak to staunch IFP members, they'll tell you that there was a concerted effort and propaganda to smear the name of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. They believe that's genuinely, and that they know the role that he played when he called for the release of Nelson Mandela in prison, and the role that he played against apartheid, and also the main thing that we've seen even from the time when Buthelezi stepped down, where he reflected on the fact that it wasn't his idea to start Inkatha Freedom, which became the IFP later on, that it was the frontline state leaders who actually initiated that, and this is why the issue of reconciliation was one that was very important for him. In fact, Dr. Mkhize reflected then on perhaps then now would be an apt moment to have that conversation as a part of picking up and continuing the legacy of Buthelezi.
All right, Ziyanda, let's wrap it up here then. What are we anticipating the rest of the week, particularly with that date of Friday for the official burial?
Various activities are expected to take place. For an example, every day at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, there will be a prayer service not far from where I am, within the Kwapindangene homestead, to pay tribute to the Christian side of the late IFP founder. And there's, of course, going to be a memorial on Wednesday at the Prince Mangosuthu Stadium. I think 10,000 capacity is what we're hearing at this stage. And that it will be the venue at which the funeral will also take place. A lot of logistics being, worked out here. One, because the presidency is affording him an official state funeral. But, of course, the issue of when it's a funeral like this, Kathy, you can't tell you can't tell people they can't come or who mustn't come. We know that there's going to be AmaZulu coming from as far as Gauteng through to KwaZulu-Natal to pay tribute to him, because he played a senior role in various aspects, whether it's in the royal household, whether it's within the IFP. And where we're located, in fact, is in the Zulu district municipality, which is the stronghold of the IFP, which is here in northern KwaZulu-Natal. So certainly we're expecting thousands to come out and pay tribute to a father and a leader to them.
Our senior politics reporter Ziyanda will stay on the story throughout the week. And you also heard there from Reputation First Managing Director Tshepo Matseba.